Rockhound here. With less than 3 weeks to go before Mavericks The Forge becomes available for founders to play, I have just a short update this week. Automaton released a 23-second clip on Twitter of the AKM assault rifle animations for Mavericks Proving Grounds, so I'll take a close look at the animations and compare the ADS animation with that seen in PUBG for the AKM. The animation opens with the camera moving along the right side of the weapon laid out on a table, and we get a good idea of the attention to detail from the artists here, with tiny wear marks shown in the timber of the foregrip. We also see a 7.62mm round that goes with the weapon lying beside it. As we move forward along the weapon, we see the gas block that diverts propellant gases into the gas cylinder, as this is a gas-operated weapon. And then at the end of the barrel, we see the slanted muzzle, which is one of the easiest ways to differentiate the AKM variant from its parent, the AK-47. That slanted muzzle forces expanded propellant gases up and to the right in order to reduce recoil in the weapon for a right-handed firer. Now, a bayonet could potentially be added to the weapon, which I think, like Battlefield 1, would be an interesting way to kill an opponent in Mavericks, although this would require quite a lot of work from the animation team, so it might be something that we add to the wish list for down the track. Next we see the FPP view of a character running with the AKM, then bringing it up to aim down sights and fire the weapon. The animation shows the weapon being held low and out of the way as the character runs, and the movement to ADS is pretty snappy. As the weapon fires, we see hot gases being expelled from relief ports on the gas block of the weapon as well. Let's now compare this animation side by side with a similar animation from PUBG. There are a few differences between the two animations. Firstly, the time it takes the weapon to be ready to fire. From the point where the Mavericks AKM begins moving into the ADS position to where we see the weapon ready to fire takes around 0.2 of a second, while PUBG takes almost an additional 0.2 of a second to ADS. For players, this may feel like you can engage faster in Mavericks than you can in PUBG, with the downside being that the animation may not look quite as smooth. However, this is a first-person shooter after all, and I would rather have snappy ADS speed over animation smoothness when it comes to shooting animations. Reaction time is everything, so I think this is a win to Mavericks here. Second up, there is a big difference between the animations and how recoil is shown. The PUBG AKM demonstrates significant visual recoil of the weapon, with the rail on the weapon moving right to the bottom of the screen, which almost seems like it's moving too far relative to the character's head. In contrast, the Mavericks AKM hardly moves, and I think the recoil looks almost a bit underdone here. I think a visual weapon recoil about halfway between these two would probably be about right. Thirdly, the PUBG AKM has a top rail on it for adding optics, while the Mavericks AKM doesn't. Now this opens up a few questions. For instance, does it mean that the Mavericks AKM won't be able to add optics? I really hope that isn't the case, because if the AKM is the best weapon you can find, you shouldn't be that disadvantaged by it. However, it could also mean that top rails are added to the weapon as a lootable item, but that would seem kind of unnecessary to me. So it's puzzling why there's no top rail, and I would like to hear from the dev team why there isn't one. Looking at the two muzzle flashes, I probably prefer the PUBG one. However, it could show a little more of the gases exhausting from the weapon's relief ports. Strangely, the PUBG weapon isn't sighted correctly, with the front post sitting too far to the right when being aimed. Now the front post on an AKM iron sight is adjustable, both left and right and up and down, so there's no reason why it shouldn't be actually centered, other than poor aim by the character. The Maverick sight looks much better in that respect. Lastly, just looking away from the weapon for a moment, I think this view shows a pretty good comparison between the environment in PUBG and that in Mavericks. The Mavericks environment is hands down more realistic and natural looking. Okay, we then move on to a brief animation of the player running through open forest past a commercial logging machine. Not really much to add here other than that the AKM is held in a low position that looks fine and is unobstructive. We then see the AKM being fired and reloaded. There does seem to be an error here though, with the animation showing spent casings moving off to the left rather than upwards and to the right, which is the correct direction, even if the character is moving to the right. So it looks like there's something for the animators to fix here. The full reload animation, with the charging handle being pulled, looks pretty good and isn't overcomplicated. Again, the environment looks great here, and I'm really looking forward to the next Making Mavericks episode, which will look at that in more detail. That's likely to be one of the last dev diaries we see before Mavericks the Forge goes live on November 29. Next we move on to the last animation shown in this update, which is the Inspect Weapon animation for the AKM. We get a good view of the left side of the weapon here, and also the overly clean character hands again. Now you know I'm not going to let that one go, guys. Then the character proceeds to do something pretty dumb. Well, he has his finger on the trigger, he reaches forward and seems to check the sturdiness of the front sight with his left hand by placing his hand over the muzzle. Now we don't know if the lore of Mavericks even extends to things like characters in the game knowing about gun safety. Maybe they don't even care about such things. Having said that, this example raises the question of what gives the game its own character. You know how sometimes the sensible thing to do isn't always the right thing for the game. In other words, we know that he shouldn't do this, but hey, maybe it should just be left in the game because it gives it a bit of quirkiness. Let me know what you think about that in the comments below. Well, that's it for the new AKM footage. However, before I go, I just want to correct something from my previous video. In that video, we saw this USP reload animation, which looks different to the other USP reloads we had seen previously, and I was puzzled why the magazine was shown so close to the character's face. Well, it turns out there's a reason for that. This animation is actually played if you make the mistake of trying to reload a full magazine. So if you do that, the character will remove the magazine, which we don't see here, look at it, realize it's full, and then embarrassingly put it back into the weapon. It's pretty funny, and I like that the devs have added this into the game. Anyhow, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.